But we'll start with you.
Yeah, I work for Xspace. They asked me to go study the future. I interview tech executives and innovators and put that up on Facebook and YouTube.
All right, my name is John Matherly. I run a project called Shodan, where I crawl the internet and find every device that's connected to it. And I make the data available both as a search engine and as a service that I provide to companies.
I'm Brian Behlendorf. I'm an investor with Mithril Capital Management. I've got a background in open source software, as you probably heard. And we really look for technology companies that are trying to reinvent industries that maybe other people have forgotten about.
And very quickly, I'm with the Wall Street Journal here. I moved here about a year ago. Before I was in New York and then Hong Kong before that. So I write about tech. And we'll kick this off, keeping it quite broad. Whether you want to start with Edward Snowden or you want to start with Apple iCloud incident last week. A lot of people, hello. A lot of people are suddenly thinking about security a lot more than they may have in the past when it comes to mobile devices, when it comes to the internet. And I suppose my first question is, have you seen a change in how ordinary people, not just people in the Valley or not just people in tech, but how ordinary people think about security and the safety of their data online? And that's an open question, so go for it.
All right, so I'll be the first to say that I don't believe that all these breaches have had an actual noticeable impact on the way people purchase products and the way they make decisions to buy products. You know, when the Snowden thing came out, everybody was, up in arms, like metadata this, metadata that. And how many people actually left these different services? How many people actually changed their behavior because of the revelations? Very few people do. Very, very few. A handful of people. Very few people care about security enough where it's a point that they consider when buying a product or using a product. So from where I stand, I keep track of devices. I have not noticed any difference in behavior, both in terms of what products they buy. Are they start looking at, what information does the device store? They don't care about that. They care about the features. They care about how does this make my life easier? How will this improve my life? That's it. Security is a non-factor.
And that's true inside the company. One of my friends was an executive at Twitter, and he wanted Twitter to turn on two-factor authentication company-wide and force everybody to use two-factor authentication, and the idea was quickly killed inside the company. And I'm sure it's been killed at Google, and I'm sure it's been killed at Facebook because nobody's doing forced two-factor authentication, right? By the way, do people know what two-factor authentication is? Maybe we should.
Yeah, maybe why don't you quickly
It's
boil it down for us.
I have to put two passwords in my Facebook, right? If I set up my new iPhone on Saturday, I have to put in my password to get into Facebook, and then it says, will you put in the code that's generated from the app on my old device that is already trusted by Facebook. So if you are hacking me, you might figure out my password, but you don't have access to that code generator that's trusted, and so you can't get in, right?
So to speak to
is that accurate?
That's close enough. To speak to the point, though, that nobody cares, or that nobody's behavior has changed, there have been studies that have been done over the last 10 years asking every year, how much do you trust the internet? And they ask it a bunch of different ways. How much do you trust the places that you shop at to keep your purchases confidential, to protect your credit card number adequately? How many people are running ad blockers, for example? And what are the reasons for the people who run ad blockers? How much of it is the noise that advertising creates? And how much of it instead is the sense that the advertisers are gathering data about you? And there's been a very linear progression that started out in the low double digits, but now is well over, in the case of how much do you trust e-commerce, more than a majority, or more than 50% of people are concerned that the sites that they do business with are reselling their data onto other providers without their knowledge, despite whatever privacy policy might exist. And in these other cases as well, there's been a progression upward, and in the last year, a bit of an uptick, although a lot of that was around government use of data. And we know that the ad tech industry has been also in the surveillance industry for many years as well. And so there is a consumer demand for it. And you see this in the evidence of certain chat apps like Wicker, for example, which is essentially a secure Snapchat. And if all those celebrities that had been sharing photos with their loved ones, and had their photos hacked a couple of weeks ago, if they'd been using Wicker, it would have been much harder for their accounts to be compromised because those files would have never been stored in the cloud unencrypted, right? So there's consumer demand for it, and I would suggest, and I think like an investor, right, is there an untapped, latent consumer demand for something, right? Something that will express itself when the right product comes out. Nobody thought before Apple entered the cell phone business that you could think of a cell phone as a beautiful product, right? As a product that you would use for any other reason except you had to, right? Cell phones before the iPhone were ugly, they were functional, you hoped they didn't drop a call, but you wouldn't even think about surfing the web on an old Nokia, feature phone. It was a painful experience. It took Apple coming in, sensing that latent demand, and building a great product for it. And I think the same thing exists when it comes to privacy of personal data.
There are some companies. Mark Cuban is funding a company called Cyberdust, and he says it's a chat messenger kind of thing. No message hits his server. So there's no way for a government to subpoena your message. There's no way for a hacker to see the message on the cloud server. They would have to interrupt it. It's a peer-to-peer messenger, and it's encrypted. So it's going to be pretty hard for somebody to get involved in our private conversations. And you're right. There is some demand, but I did not see a change in my Facebook, and I follow a lot. And Twitter. The Twitter stream did not slow down after Snowden. And most of the people who I hang out with still are refusing to put lock screen passwords on their phones and use real long non-dictionary word passwords that are hard to remember, or passphrases, which is what we both do. There are a segment that are getting more educated and have a bigger risk. A celebrity has a bigger risk than other people, but it is a problem.
I also think they would say they care, but did they do follow-up questions? Did you change any behavior? For example, if you did a survey after Snowden release, asking people, are you upset about the government spying on you? They'd be like, you have like a 90% positive response to that. And you're like, the follow-up question, are you changing your passwords? Are you still using Facebook? Are you still using Gmail? Are you moving your mail to a different provider? No, you don't. You're going to be upset about it. You're going to be like, well, this shouldn't be happening. And 5 minutes later, you're going to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to move my Gmail account to a third-party provider. I don't know whether, for example, the chat message application, is that going to be free? If there's no central server, how are they going to make money?
Well, as a matter of fact, a lot of these services, Wicker, and there's other webmail services hosted outside the United States that have had the infrastructure in place to be zero knowledge on the server side, to protect security much more. They saw signups shoot up tremendously, right? Is it enough to tip the needle? Is it enough to be relevant in continued growth in some of the other services? Hard to tell now. But it's an expression of a consumer demand that a smart company, I think, will pick up on and start to play to.
So it sounds to me, just to bridge these thoughts here, that when John says nobody has changed their behavior, the suggestion is that perhaps we need the technology to really, the right killer app to come out, or the right.
So when I say nobody, I mean not in a meaningful way. You're always going to have to tech people. That, they're going to get super upset about something and they're going to migrate. But my mom and dad are not going to migrate. When I say nobody, I mean sort of the mass market adoption. I just don't see them making decisions based on security or getting upset enough to move.
I think it's worse than that. I'm not moving from Gmail, not because of any of this stuff, even if I cared about it, because their spam blocker is better than any other system known to humankind. And their categorization engines are better than any other system. And Rackspace hosts a lot of email using Exchange. but I know it's not as good as Gmail's spam system. And I get 1,000 spams a day because my email is public, and I never get one in my inbox. And on my other email systems, I get a lot of email in my inbox that is spam.
So I was setting up websites when everyone said, well, you won't get the mass of people on AOL to start using the internet. Because the internet is messy, the internet is ugly, right? And AOL is a nice walled garden, right? And it's a convenient thing, and the consumers love it, right? Getting tuned in to the weak signals about where consumer sentiment lies and where it's likely to head to is something that's very important when you're trying to think on 5 and 10-year timeframes, right? And so my sense from the response to Snowden, inside the United States and outside, yeah, it's hard to tell if people are using Twitter less or more. I know that I see fewer different names in my Facebook feed than I used to, and it's not because I have fewer friends than I used to, right? And I don't know if that's just the algorithms in Facebook kind of tweaking it to make me happy, and all the rest of my friends are actually sad in their posting. I don't know, but it's changed the tenor, and I know a lot of the people that I talk to are much less comfortable sharing confidential information with me over email than they used to be, right? They're like, let's meet in person to talk about this deal or this opportunity.
But that's at Microsoft, I was told, delete your email after 6 months because they didn't want the consequences, legal consequences of discussing patents or discussing business deals or discussing strategy, because that email, when the DOJ lawsuit happened, all Microsoft email went into the public record, and there was deep consequences for that email stream, and everybody in the business community knows you do not discuss strategy or patents on email. If you do, you are opening yourself up for instance, in patents, if I talk to you about a patent and it turns out Rackspace infringed that patent for some reason, the penalty is 3 times what it would be if I didn't knowingly infringe a patent. So there's deep consequences to talking about some of this stuff in email that can be easily searched and easily gone through by a team of lawyers.
But I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
You should be able to have an attorney-client privileged conversation with your lawyer over
That's
email.
with your lawyer.
Right?
I'm talking about with
No,
coworkers.
I understand. But there are some uses for email and for the net that we should preserve as valid uses, right? Without saying, no, we just have to write off the entire internet as something that will come back to haunt you if you say the wrong thing. I take a different feel, because I got online at a time when people were using the internet to have what felt like confidential conversations, what felt like the ability to read a controversial news group or to go visit a website and be anonymous in doing that. And I think that's an important part of growing up, is being able to explore unconventional ideas, of being able to figure out your own identity, right? Without having to fit into a service that demands your real name rather than allowing you to have a pseudonym, right?
Well, good. We've hinted at this notion that I think awareness certainly has grown among the general public about the threats that are out there, but I'm wondering, are there threats?
Could I just ask, how many people use two-factor authentication on any service? Not very many hands.
Actually, more than I expected.
More than I expected, but not very many.
Right.
You should be using two-factor authentication on every service. Google offers it, Apple offers it, Twitter offers it, Facebook offers it, LinkedIn offers it. You should be using it on all systems. How many people do not have a password on a lock screen? Are you going to admit it? Or how many people have a password on a lock screen? Let's do it the other way. Raise your hands. There's still a lot of hands that aren't going up. So if you get your phone stolen, they have access to everything in your life, including on my phone, my bank account. If you got into my phone, you have control of me. And so I have a really long password on my lock screen, and I use 1 finger, not 10. By the way, if you, a little trick on the fingerprint scanner, because I use the fingerprint scanner to get into my phone really fast. If you scan it this way, and this way, and this way, it'll be faster and more accurate, and it'll open up the phone faster. So I use 1 finger, but I scan it 3 times, so I can get into my phone faster. Little tip.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll do that when I get home. Yeah. But just to ask the question, I mean, are there threats out there that we haven't even begun to think about yet. Yeah. And maybe I'll pose this question to John, but any of you, of course, feel free to weigh in, but why don't we start with John in terms of the threats that we may not be thinking about. And I asked John because he has launched a search engine that maybe you can talk a little bit about as well.
All right, so one reason why Shodan, my website, has become sort of famous is because people discovered that factories, nuclear power plants, office buildings, all these things, traffic lights, red light cameras, car washes, crematoriums, these things are sometimes connected to the internet. And because the people who connected to the internet didn't understand technology, they put them online very insecure. So you could go over the internet and you could shut down a turbine. You can go to a traffic light and you can see all the cars that are driving through it. You can read the license plate information. You can go to wind farms. So for example, Shodan, at any moment in time, I can tell you which countries have how many wind farms of a certain brand. How many wind turbines does each wind farm have? How much power does it produce? Like all this stuff is publicly accessible information, no authentication, there's no hacking, nothing involved. You just go out there and you talk to the device. So a lot of people, and this also goes back into the whole Internet of Things stuff, they don't realize that these devices, these things, are like computers. They are computers nowadays. They have the exact same issues that a regular computer has. We see more of these smart devices popping up. There was an interesting story half a year ago where a smart refrigerator was used to send spam. Somebody installed malware on it, and they used it to send spam. This is something that you used to hear all the time with your Windows machine. And now they're figuring out, hey, all these embedded systems, they're easy targets. Because nobody treats them like they'll treat a regular computer. They don't think about firewalls or antivirus or security for their refrigerator or their TV. They just don't think about that. Because historically, they've been these dumb analog devices. So basically, we're seeing all these same security issues that happened for the past decade on Windows and everything else happen all over again on these new emerging embedded devices.
In fact, there's a conference, if you can make it to the States, Las Vegas, once a year, called DEF CON. It's a famous kind of hacker conference. It's about 15,000 people now. It's been going for about 22 years. And you can see presentations from security researchers, quote unquote, some of whom are very young and very ambitious, and you could otherwise call them hackers or gray hats or black hats. But they'll give presentations on how they took that toy teddy bear that had a camera built into it as a way for parents to keep track of their kids, and that ended up not only being accessible online, but you can get into it and change how it programs and make it say very creepy things to the kid, right? And so there's a level of immaturity when it comes to this Internet of Things kind of space that will only get worse and worse. In fact, a group of the researchers have put together a kind of a free consultancy as a gift to this community. They're calling it wearethecavalry.org, and they're basically setting themselves up to try to educate the devices community, the toy-making community, basically everyone doing IoT on how to harden their systems. And there is this baseline. If you had made sure that your device is auto-updated, made sure that when they talk to the internet, they only talk over SSL, right? TLS, whatever. There's 5 or 6 principles that if the makers followed these principles, we'd end up with a much more secure home environment, workplace environment, et cetera. It almost makes you wonder if the answer to this is some sort of marketing and branding kind of thing. In the same way you have organic food, you have secure things or something like that.
There's a company in Israel that's a startup you haven't heard of. It's called ThetaRay, and I visited them, and they said they started their company. It's a security company, and a lot of the world's security companies come out of Israel for a lot of reasons because their country is under attack constantly. They assume that the hacker has already broken in and is already inside. So if you start with that assumption, then they look for anomalies of things that the hacker might touch or download or whatnot. And it makes it so that a security person can see these anomalies and click through them very quickly and see a pattern and maybe start building defenses to wall things off over time. But I found that was very fascinating, and it matched my own experience when I ran the camera store. I found somebody stealing from inside the store. An employee was taking lenses home in a thermos, it turned out. But I kept finding empty camera boxes, empty lens boxes, and that was the anomaly. And I said, and then I started looking for why these empty lenses were showing up, and we set up a camera and found out how he was doing it. So if you start with that assumption that somebody has already hacked your world, what kind of things would you do to keep yourself safe or your corporate information safe?
And are there other upsides to the surveillance state, right? Like cops, for example, in the United States are starting to wear cameras right on their uniforms to record all of their interactions with citizens, right? To record everything they go out and do. And cities that have tried this have discovered that police forces that have cameras on, they see a dramatic decline in both incidents involving police brutality and in reports from citizens of police brutality, as well as people being arrested who resist arrest because they're acting up. Both parties know they're on camera. Both of them know if they go to court, there's going to be there's actual evidence, and so both of them are likely to be much more chilled out when they interact with each other. It's an incredibly positive thing.
Well, good, but obviously there is a scare factor when we hear that our refrigerator or our teddy bear or our power plants can be hacked into so easily. Who should we be concerned about? I mean, both with IoT and with our own Gmail accounts and so on. I mean, is it foreign governments? Is it terrorists? Is it hackers? Is it advertisers? Is it Mark Zuckerberg we should be scared of? Or?
All the above.
You want to start with that one?
I'll start, sure. I think, if you walk into a store and there's no price tags on any of the items in the store, right? You know that when you ask a salesperson for the price of a given thing, they're probably going to look at you and make a judgment based on your gender, based on your age, based on the clothes that you're wearing, right? And we kind of know that this is the case. Maybe we go buy a car, at least in the United States, you're very used to the idea that when you buy a car, the dealer will quote two different prices based on how clearly it looks like you want a bargain, right? But people in the United States are resisting this. They're tending to move their purchases, even of cars, online because they want a predictable price. They want to know like they got a good deal, right? And if, say, Amazon were to ever present two different prices to you based on your purchase history or whatever, you'd probably get pretty angry at that, right? The fact is, the more information that's out there about us, if it's not in ways that we know about. When I post to Twitter and Facebook, I know what I'm putting out there, right? I'm wearing a T-shirt that says it. I understand that. But my take-home salary is something I keep to myself, right? And if advertisers have figured out I like a certain thing and therefore I probably make this amount, that kind of creeps me out. And the more creeped out I am, the less likely I am, frankly, to buy online or buy from places that look like they might adjust their price.
But I can guess what your economic level is by the neighborhood you live in, the things you buy. Do you have a Tesla or do you have a 6-year-old Prius like me, right?
I have a 10-year-old Jeep, but yeah. Which actually would, anyways, counter trend, let's just say it, or counter indicative. I like being unpredictable too, so what can I say?
And when we go back to sort of that power plant idea there too, sorry, did you want to make another point?
Yeah, I was just thinking because you asked who should we be afraid of.
Of course, yes.
All technologies have a downside. Automobiles have a downside. They kill 30,000 people. 30,000 people die in the United States in cars. Yet I drive every day. I take a risk of driving. Why? Because the utility is so deep. That I want to drive. I want to get in a car. I want to go out tonight in a car, right? And there's a risk for doing that. And the same thing is going to be true of all of these systems, Facebook, Internet of Things. There's going to be a utility that outweighs the risk of getting your money stolen or getting a personal piece of data like your salary put out in public or a picture that you shot with your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. There is a risk. I am taking steps to reduce the risk. That's all I can do, right?
So in terms of actual security issues for different groups. The power plant, having that compromised, most people are worried about other governments doing that. You need technical skill, even if it's on the internet, you need some skill to actually compromise and do something damaging with it. So in terms of these large systems, you're usually worried about groups that have a lot of money. Okay? And a lot of people are focused on those, because everybody knows nuclear power plants exploding, bad idea. So lots of money is being spent on securing those things. What people are not spending money on, and people are not really caring about right now, is all these consumer electronics devices. When I tell people about a refrigerator or a smart egg carton or a smart light bulb, they're like, who cares? Why do I care about the security of my egg carton or my refrigerator or my light bulb or my air conditioning system? Why does it matter? If it blue screens, I need to restart it, who cares? Well, what I tell them is that it actually really, really matters on scale. So in security, there's this term of criticality by numbers. If you have one refrigerator that gets hacked, not a big deal. What about 1,000? What if you have a whole town where all refrigerators are on internet? This has actually happened. There was a town in Norway. They upgraded their infrastructure so they could control auto lighting and everything for the roads, the traffic lights and everything, centrally over a computer. By accident, the guy the company installed it, put everything on the internet. It was found on Shodan. Literally the whole town, all lighting, everything was on the internet because they screwed up. And so all of a sudden you're in a situation where if just one light bulb goes down, who cares? But if you can remotely turn off all the air conditioning in a city during summer, if you can turn off all the lights, that becomes a national security problem. All of a sudden, your small refrigerator, your small egg carton that doesn't matter to you, it will matter if every household has that device, if every household is poorly configured. All of a sudden, scale matters. And that's one of the things that I'm often most worried about, is sort of these everyday devices that people very nonchalantly think about. But it really matters, also because you can't update them very often as easily as you update a Windows computer.
Yeah.
They're just not the same things.
Yeah.
So you install them once, you buy a smart light bulb, you install it. How often do you patch it? How often do you patch your TV?
Yeah.
You don't. So they're not the same things, and they have big security problems, and they matter.
And the obvious question is, I'm sure everyone in this room wants to know, well, what can we do about it? I mean, we don't want that to happen. And what needs to be done at an individual level? And perhaps we can bring Brian in for this too. What can be done at a governmental level? And just by background, Brian did do a lot of work for the White House, U.S. government, and was the chief technology officer at the World Economic Forum. But on both levels, just from an individual perspective and from a governmental level.
Well, the two signals that manufacturers and businesses will respond to is government regulation and consumer demand, right? And government tends to be very sloppy and not very effective when it comes to regulating. It's still essential in a lot of functions, but kind of that which governs least governs best, right? And we do run the risk of regulation stepping in and perhaps putting a strangle on internet-connected devices the same way the FDA, very tightly controls pharmaceuticals and other medical devices, right? But I'd love to see how we might stoke up consumer demand for some of this, right? Would you pay more for a device that in some way or another measurable was more secure? And that's difficult right now because our concepts of security are so fluid. Our concepts of who can we trust are really difficult because it seems like every technology company just wants to sell our data on to the next. This is one reason to be very optimistic about Apple, because I think of all the large technology companies, Apple, and arguably Microsoft a bit as well, have the strongest message out there about protecting the consumers, their own users, who they receive direct payment from, against privacy violations. In fact, I've been very encouraged by the Health Kit thing that they've rolled out, which has been a way to integrate medical devices and personal fitness devices and allow apps to consume that data, but those apps have to respect the boundaries of where that privacy exists. So by and large, I think we need to figure out how to send signals, how the consumers can send signals to the companies that they will pay a premium, they'll pay more, they will prefer the safer alternative.
When I worked at Microsoft, I interviewed the team that remade the company and taught all the software developers on how to write secure code. And one of the things that they taught me is reduce your surface area. And if you look inside Facebook, Twitter, Google, and other things, there's a setting or there's a page there that shows all the apps that have access to Facebook. And I go through that every month at least to reduce the number of apps. And if I don't use an app anymore, I remove its access privileges, which means if an app gets hacked, they won't be able to break into my account because I removed permission from that. Very few people do that. But I look at life like that. How can I reduce my surface area so that a hacker has fewer places to try to attack me?
So I'm actually in a boat where I don't believe that we can change consumer behavior to be more secure like you're describing. I think that's an uphill battle. I don't think it's going to happen. And I would actually add that there's a third way of incentivizing businesses to actually change their behavior and add more security, and that's insurance. So we're seeing a huge uptick in what they call cyber insurance. So a lot of companies didn't want to spend money on security because there's no reason to. You're not going to sell more products, you're not going to make more money by adding security. They're not going to pay for it. But what if, because of bad security, you get mentioned on the front page of New York Times? This happened
The
to
Wall Street
Siemens.
Journal.
Or Wall Street Journal, yes, even better. You know, that happened with Siemens. They had a security issue, several, and they got flagged, they got really hammered on it. They lost tons of sales, you know, like a whole year of just like them getting hammered on security issues. And everybody else was like, oh shit, we don't want to be like Siemens. We don't want to be them. So we want to spend money to preemptively, you know, prevent this sort of thing from happening. And cyber insurance companies, we're looking at them because hopefully they can force companies to spend more money on security. You know, I'm already working with some insurance companies that go to Shodan and they say, hey, you know, how public are they on the internet? Do they have any office buildings? Do they have anything on the internet that probably shouldn't be there? If they do, then they need to pay a higher premium, or maybe we don't want to insure them. And if they don't want to get in, like if they can't get insured, then that's a direct monetary incentive for them to actually spend money.
Yeah. The challenging thing is a lot of the cybersecurity insurance approaches treat being hacked like it's an act of God, like a flood or like a fire. And yeah, there's a few things you can do. I think in terms of hardening, in the same way that you can, you know, reinforce your house and hopefully get a lower rate on earthquake insurance in California, for example. But I think there's a lot more that could be done. That's very similar to the way that car insurance in the United States is starting to tilt away from what kind of car, and it's the same price per month, and towards how many miles do you drive? How do you drive? Do you accelerate quickly? Do you brake quickly? You know, a lot of things that are starting to be much more characteristic of that specific instance. So scanning and looking for open holes and trying to evaluate best practices are one. But I think we might see something emerge that's not unlike accounting standards, the way that companies keep their books very clean and very predictable by having outside auditors come in and having repeatable processes that are defined that allow investors to make a decision about how much do I trust this company's books and this company's numbers. Now a very similar and perhaps even integrated with that risk picture, a risk assessment of the technology posture that a company has.
Yeah. I'm noticing a new kind of hack, by the way, on email. I'm getting a email that says something about opening a document on Google Drive. And you click that, and all of a sudden you've been hacked, and it forwards that to everybody on your system. So I do not click any link sent to me on Twitter, Facebook, or email unless I have asked you to send that link, or I've called you and verified, did you really just send me a Gmail document? And you say, no, I didn't just send that. Oh, I got hacked, right? And that's how this conversation's been going lately. because I call you up and say, did you just send me this? I also know that Apple or my bank or my stores I deal with never ever ask you to click on something and fill out a form. So I get phishing emails all day long from things that look like Apple Computer.
I thought you used Gmail and didn't get it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, well, I actually look at my spam folder, so I see what kinds of stuff you guys are doing. But I see this stuff, right? And I never, ever click a link from my bank because the bank, first of all, never, ever sends you a request for a password or a social security number or a personal data. And if I see something that I think is from the bank, I don't look at that. I go to the bank's website, wellsfargo.com, and see if they put something on the webpage about it, and I check it there. I do not click on a link. If you stop that kind of behavior, you will save yourself money in hacking.
And 19% of smartphone users, only 19%, do online banking. That there's kind of this ceiling that they hit, at least in the United States. That might not be true in Kenya, where there's a tremendous amount. But in the US, they haven't cracked 19, 20% penetration into smartphones and mobile banking. And I think it's because people don't trust their devices enough to do mobile banking from. And I think that's something the technologists need to work on and the companies need to work on, is how do we make these devices trustworthy again?
There's
a final thought here, yeah.
Yeah, there's another problem. A Wired journalist got hacked by a social hack. So the hacker called Apple Computer and said, hey, I have a password problem. I can't get into my account. I do have this a piece of the social security number. I have a credit card. And they actually turned over the password to him. Once he got in there, then he went to Gmail, and because there were so many interdependencies of these systems, that once you're in one place, you can go around and get into other things in your life, to the point where they destroyed his computer. They wiped his computer eventually, right? It's really scary stuff, and it took him a week to unwind what they had done. So I'm trying to reduce the dependencies between like Facebook sending an email request to my email. I'm trying to reduce that. I'm trying to put, if there's a security question, I'm trying to put a fake answer in there that's not possible to guess. Because if you ask for my mother's maiden name, you probably can do a Google search on that and find it. Or you can socially hack and call my brother and say, was your mother's maiden name Smith? No, it was Bolans, right? Now he has a piece of information that he can go to all my banking equipment and try to fill something in. So I put a fake answer in on those things that only I know. So if you do call up the bank and start guessing what my mother's maiden name is, it won't work. These are the kinds of thinking that I think we all need to start doing, because the costs are so high when somebody gets into your systems now.
Well, good. A lot to think about. And we are running up against time, but we do have time for some questions from the audience, if there are any. So raise your hand if you have a question for any of our panelists here, or any question about security in general. We got someone? Oh, I'm sorry.
Keep talking.
It's working. Okay. Hi, my name is Michael Leshniak. I work at SK Planet. I'm a product manager there, and we do a lot of different things. I just want to make a quick comment before I question first. I think a lot of people might not have understood your question. Everyone in Korea uses two-factor authentication, and at least when they make payments online. And in fact, it's so cumbersome that there's like the reverse conversation here. And I think that to the comment that there's an issue with consumer behavior, here it's been a top-down approach. And so that's probably a big difference. And in terms of the latency, Apple is using multiple processors to secure payment information now, right? And I think they see that people want to use their phone for payment. Yeah. And so my question is, do you think Apple is going to see an increase in market share next year because of Apple Pay?
It's not just Apple. Well, okay, that's a different question.
Okay.
It's not just Apple. The Google Watch, the Google Wear, if the Google Wear is next to the Android, it knows that it combines to unlock some features. So if somebody steals my phone and the phone gets more than 30 feet away from my watch, it shuts down because it knows that it's probably not being used properly. And that it gives you a new kind of security, right? The Apple iWatch has a sensor for watching your skin, watching your heart rate on the watch, and it's going to use that to unlock certain things on your phone because it knows you're actually wearing the watch and it's actually close to your phone, which it usually is. These things do not get very far apart, right? If they do, it's weird. Somebody ripped off my watch or somebody ripped off my phone. I think it will affect sales because people do want more security. They want to feel better about their systems. And if a company comes along, I'm gonna tend to go to the company that is treating the customers better than the other company.
I think if a platform war emerges between competing ways to pay at point of sale terminals, we'll all lose. Because vendors people who run the local convenience store don't want to have 5 different devices there in order to satisfy Apple customers and Android customers and others, and the local banks who will want their own standards as well. So I would hope that instead there's ways to find either it's one device that can accept lots of different approaches to using mobile payments, or it's reusing an existing protocol. But nobody yet, I mean, even PayPal and eBay working together at this, at least in the States, has really cracked how to do really simple payments from phones. And I dare say that same, at least in the States, that same phenomenon that keeps people from using online banking apps may keep them from being comfortable with the idea of stored value on a phone. I hope not. I mean, but at the same time, I don't have any. That doesn't solve a problem for me, right? Like I have a separate card to pay for things virtually, and I carry cash. And it's like if it doesn't solve a real problem, I wonder how quickly it'll get adopted and whether it'll have any impact on market share.
What's really interesting is my bank keeps calling me if a weird transaction comes in, and I set up my bank account so that if a purchase is made of over a certain amount, it sends me an email so I know, and that way I could call my wife. Did you just buy something at this store for $5,000, right? And she does the same to me. My purchases here are being reported to her.
That must make Christmas very awkward.
Yeah, but Christmas, well, you can do the cash or a little bit of Bitcoin, maybe, something like that. And what else do we do with the bank? There's a new system in the United States called Tap and Go or Tapingo. It's for college kids only right now. 70% of all transactions at Santa Clara University are going through this thing. They put a box in the store or in the coffee shop that lights up and beeps when you order from your mobile phone. It enables a new kind of thing like an Uber, where you don't have to carry your cash anymore. You don't have to carry a wallet, and it pays for everything. And you don't even have to talk to the people at the store. You just go in and pick something up and leave. Apple Store app works like this, right? If you buy from Apple a power supply, for instance, on the store app, and you say, I want to pick it up, you can walk in the store, pick up that power supply, and leave without talking to anybody. It's really freaky, but they know you're there because your beacon on the phone is like, "Hey."
You might still want some confirmation before you walk out of a store with.
They might ask. They might ask, "Are you Robert Scoble?" Because
then you can have it for free.
No. They have it on their phones. They're warned when one of these sales gets made, and they're watching for you. And so if they think you're a thief, they're just going to ask you, can you prove that you paid for that at the front door, right? Because there's somebody standing at the front door of every Apple store, if you haven't noticed that. I do. And they offer a new kind of payment system that's even better than Apple Pay, right? So.
Okay, and can we do one more question out there? Do we have a taker?
Anybody?
There, we have a hand over here.
Wow, stark.
Yeah.
Hello. So I feel like with agency like NSA, the U.S. government is actively making security insecure with like embedding malwares in wireless router. I know you mentioned that you do two-factor with logging into Apple, but you have a wireless router at home, right? Do you know that it's infected with malware? Like you wouldn't know, right, for sure. So my question is, who can you trust?
So that was the big thing when RSA came out, right? Like earlier this year, last year, when people figured out that RSA got paid to basically make their encryption weaker. I mean, that's what people are talking about when they say the government effectively reduces security for everybody. And that's why we've seen a big emergence, at least in the security world, for sort of open standards. So you can review everything, and you don't need to rely on a proprietary encryption algorithm by RSA. And so if they get compromised, you don't need to throw everything out the window. And people are moving towards that. It's just slow. You know, businesses, they would still prefer to buy a product from RSA than rely on open source. Just because they want services, they want guarantees, they want all these things you can't get from open source directly. You know, if you hire, Red Hat or somebody else, that's different. But just directly open source, they just don't use it yet. So
Trust has always been a relative term. I mean, we've been trusting each other since we were primates in the trees, trying to figure out who were our friends and who were our enemies, right? And trust is a proxy for being able to have a relationship with somebody without having to know everything else about them, right? And the only way that I can walk down the street and buy, a Coca-Cola at a convenience store is that I have the trust, and that comes from a bunch of different factors, but the trust that it hasn't been poisoned, right, or that it's actual Coca-Cola, right? And so trust is essential to online commerce, where we don't have the chance to meet everybody we want to buy something from, get to know their complete family history and background, right? And so we need tools to help us with trust, and we need technologies, and I happen to trust open source software more than proprietary software, because I know that even if I don't look at the code, other people can look at the code, right? I tend to trust open protocols and open platforms more than closed platforms. And so I think there is still trust there. I think there is no NSA-proof technology. It's only how difficult is it for the bad actors to do bad things and the good actors to do mistaken things, right? But it also is important that we build technologies that are good enough for everybody to be able to have a baseline level of security, such as the security to buy a Coca-Cola and not have to worry, or to get in a car and go on the highway and trust that I will live to my next destination.
Well, good. Excellent food for thought here, and I hope you all learned something. Thank you to all our panelists, and I think we're at break now, but thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.